Have you ever met someone who looked confident, well-dressed, or simply attractive, and instantly assumed they were also smart, trustworthy, and successful, even before you had any real evidence? Because if you have, you've experienced something called the halo effect, a powerful psychological bias where one positive trait influences how we perceive everything else about a person. And what makes this so fascinating is that it happens automatically, without conscious awareness, because the human brain is designed to simplify complex information. So instead of evaluating every trait independently, it creates a shortcut by letting one strong impression spill over into other areas. And this is deeply rooted in how our brains process information efficiently, because analyzing every detail about a person would take too much time and energy, so the brain fills in the gaps using assumptions. And while this can be helpful in fast-paced environments, it also leads to distorted judgments. For example, if someone is physically attractive, we are more likely to assume they are intelligent and kind, even though those traits are not actually connected. And this is why in many studies, attractive individuals are rated higher in competence and likability, not because they objectively perform better, but because perception is being shaped by this bias. And this effect doesn't just apply to appearance. It can be triggered by any standout trait, such as confidence, charisma, or even a single success. So if someone speaks clearly and confidently, people often assume they are knowledgeable, even if the content of what they're saying is average. And this is why communication style can sometimes matter more than actual substance, because the initial impression sets the tone for how everything else is interpreted. And once that tone is established, it becomes very difficult to change, because the brain seeks consistency. And this connects to another psychological principle known as confirmation bias, where people look for information that supports their existing beliefs and ignore information that contradicts them. So if someone forms a positive first impression of you, they are more likely to notice your strengths and overlook your flaws. But if the first impression is negative, they may do the opposite, focusing on mistakes and dismissing your positive qualities. And this creates a kind of self-reinforcing loop where the initial judgment becomes stronger over time, regardless of the full reality. And this is why first impressions are so powerful, because they don't just influence how people see you in the moment, they shape how your future behavior is interpreted, and the implications of this are everywhere, from job interviews where candidates who make a strong first impression are rated more favorably overall, to social situations where people who appear confident are given more opportunities to speak and lead, and even in education, where students who are perceived as capable may receive more attention and encouragement from teachers, which then actually improves their performance, creating a feedback loop that reinforces the original perception. And this is where the halo effect becomes not just a bias, but a force that can shape real outcomes in people's lives. And what's even more interesting is that there's also a reverse version of this bias, often called the horn effect, where one negative trait leads to a cascade of negative assumptions. So if someone appears awkward or makes a poor first impression, people may unconsciously assume they are less competent or less trustworthy, even if that's not true. And this highlights how much of our perception is driven by initial signals rather than objective reality. And it also explains why some people seem to have an easier time gaining respect and opportunities, because they have learned, consciously or not, how to send strong positive signals early on. And the good news is that once you understand how the halo effect works, you can start to use it to your advantage in a way that is authentic and intentional, because you don't need to fake anything. You just need to be aware of which signals carry the most weight in shaping perception. And some of the most influential signals include your posture, your eye contact, your tone of voice, your clarity of speech, and your overall presentation, because these are the cues people use to form that initial impression. And by improving these areas, you can create a positive halo that makes everything else you do more likely to be interpreted favorably. For example, speaking clearly and confidently doesn't just make you sound better. It makes people more likely to believe in your competence, and maintaining calm, steady eye contact doesn't just show attention. It signals confidence and trustworthiness. And even small details like how you dress or how you enter a room can influence how people categorize you in those first few seconds. And once that category is formed, it becomes the lens through which everything else is viewed. But it's also important to be aware of this bias when judging others, because the halo effect can lead you to overestimate someone's abilities or character based on a single trait, which can result in poor decisions, misplaced trust, or unrealistic expectations. So developing awareness means slowing down your judgments and asking yourself whether your perception is based on actual evidence or just a strong first impression, and this kind of critical thinking helps you see people more accurately and avoid being misled by surface-level cues, and at the same time, it allows you to recognize when others might be projecting a halo onto you, giving you an advantage in understanding social dynamics. Because when you realize that perception is often shaped more by signals than by substance, you can start to align both, making sure that your external presentation reflects your internal qualities. And this alignment is what creates authenticity, because the goal is not to manipulate perception, but to make it easier for people to see who you truly are without distortion. And in the end, the halo effect reveals something fundamental about human psychology, which is that we don't see people as they are. We see them through the lens of our initial impressions, and that lens can either amplify or distort reality, depending on the signals we receive. So by understanding this, you gain the ability to both manage how you are perceived and refine how you perceive others. And once you become aware of how a single trait can shape an entire judgment, you start to realize that perception is not just about what is true, but about what is visible first. And once you see how powerful that is, you can't unsee it.